The FBI is now bearing down on Russia-backed entities inside the U.S., like RT and Sputnik, and until this week, government scrutiny on them came mostly from U.S. intelligence agencies looking abroad, like the report on Russian meddling, listing Sputnik as a Russian propaganda effort serving as a platform for Kremlin messaging to Russian and international audiences. So that's the intel. But the FBI is different. It focuses on crime. And today, RT says authorities asked it to formally register as a foreign agent, and the failure to do that under law is something the FBI can investigate. There are reports it's already doing that. Former Sputnik employee Andrew Feinberg says he was interviewed by the FBI and a federal prosecutor. You may have heard his name in recent reports on the Russia case after he broke ties with Sputnik.
If the president doesn't want to do it, is that because he would rather focus his efforts with Russia on partnering to try to defeat ISIS?
Well, I think Ambassador Haley's noted at the UN that any attempt to undermine sanctions that currently exist because of the annexation of Crimea will remain in place until that issue is resolved.
Why would sending weapons to Ukraine have anything to do with sanctions?
Right. I'm not going to get into the president's negotiating strategy.
Andrew Feinberg, who says that his supervisors regularly would say, Moscow wants this or Moscow wants that.
There's Russian media organizations like RT and Sputnik spreading falsehoods and negative Hillary Clinton stuff.
The Russian state-owned news site Sputnik actually pressured its own White House correspondent to advance this fake Seth Rich story. And when he refused, he was fired.
Andrew Feinberg, the former White House correspondent for Sputnik, a Russian-owned wire, radio, and digital news service, took to Twitter a few days ago and said he's quitting, he's leaving. He said, quote, seems Sputnik is not happy with real journalists. They'd rather have actual propagandists operate anonymously.
That was Feinberg's view after leaving in June, and there is a debate to be had about propaganda. But then the FBI contacted him, raising a debate about the law. And Feinberg spoke to them for 2 hours, handed over a thumb drive with internal emails from Sputnik, and he detailed how he got direction to ask questions in that White House briefing room. Now, his exchanges with the White House are under new scrutiny. At the time, U.S. intel had publicly criticized Sputnik. Experts knew of their links to the Kremlin, but the White House was still treating them and him in the briefing room like a legit news organization. Most viewers would have no idea that entity was actually doing propaganda, and that it now, we can say, is under FBI scrutiny. Now, Sputnik says it let Feinberg go for his performance and argues all of this scrutiny actually undermines press freedom. Feinberg, though, says that he faced tension on the job whenever he tried to be independent, and he came to conclude Sputnik was pure Kremlin propaganda. Now, Yahoo first reported this week about the FBI scrutiny and its questioning of Feinberg, who is here today for his first TV interview since speaking to the FBI. Andrew, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Ari.
What did the FBI want to know from you?
They wanted to know a lot about internal processes, who I reported to, who paid me, what my day was like, where I got instructions on what to cover, how to cover it, that sort of thing. It was, a lot of internal processes, like I said, and a lot of it stemmed from the article I had in Politico a few weeks back. And a lot of the issues we covered I discussed in that article, but this was a lot more detailed of a conversation.
The FBI wanted to know from you who was calling the shots at Sputnik and whether it went back to the Kremlin?
Yeah, and I can't say where exactly the instructions came from before they got to me. They came to me from my editors, who were, with exceptions, Russian, and they would come to me and they would say Moscow wants this, Moscow wants that. And, I don't know if they were speaking to people in the Kremlin, but even if they were speaking to people back at the Home Office in Moscow, the Sputnik and RT parent company gets their instructions from the Kremlin.
Before the 2016 hacking, there has never been a big government push to make Sputnik, your former employer, register as a foreign agent. And viewers recall, of course, that's what Paul Manafort and Mike Flynn ultimately were pressured into doing. Did this new interview you had with the FBI suggest they're looking at making Sputnik potentially register as a foreign agent? Did they show an interest in that?
Absolutely. That was the purpose of the interview. That's what they're looking at. They are interested in determining whether or not Sputnik should be registering under the Foreign Agents Registration Act as foreign propaganda. And there is a carve-out in that act for what the law calls bona fide news agencies, but based on my experience there, I would argue that Sputnik is not functioning as a bona fide news agency.
Right, and that's the big question, and you're one of the handful of people who's spoken out about that at a time where the First Amendment principles are big, because there are good reasons why the government shouldn't mess with real journalists, but you phrased the question, are they real journalists? Here's some other former Sputnik and RT employees speaking out about the same thing.
Personally, I cannot be part of a network funded by the Russian government that whitewashes the actions of Putin. I'm proud to be an American and believe in disseminating the truth, and that is why, after this newscast, I'm resigning.
What RT does is it very much mirrors the Kremlin line. So, you know, whatever they're putting out, we're kind of their shield for those lies, basically.
Those former employees like yourself are certainly sharing experience, which is helpful to the public record. The flip side is the question to you or them, why didn't you realize this going in? Why was it such a surprise that an entity with public financial backing of the Kremlin would be like this?
That's a good question. And you know, I don't think I was naive when I took the job. I knew that Sputnik was Russian government backed. I went into interview for the job. You know, they asked me questions. I asked questions, and they made certain assurances. They told me that I would have the editorial independence and the ability to, you know, work in the same manner that, you know, I would work at any other journalism organization. And those promises turned out to be false.
Right.
But, you know, I'm not going to call someone I don't know a liar without, you know, giving him the chance to prove himself one.
And final question is the big question. From your time there and what you've learned, do you think these Kremlin-backed organizations and the Russian government did have agreements, collusion, or arrangements with any Trump officials?
I can't speak to that. What I can tell you is that many of the most popular, you know, articles about things like WikiLeaks and Pizzagate and other conspiracy theories were prominently featured on the Sputnik website. Incidentally, I worked for the Newswire division, which is a separate part of that office, but, you know, they were featured very prominently on the Sputnik website, and, you know, they get picked up by other American outlets, InfoWars, Breitbart,
by right-wing
Gateway
outlets?
Pundit, and yeah, right-wing outlets. And Sputnik functions as, you know, part of this right-wing media ecosystem. And there's a big difference between these sites that are run by Americans, employ Americans, exercising their right to freedom of speech, and a news site that is funded by a foreign government with the express purpose of not reporting the news, but influencing opinion. And when the money for that site comes from a foreign government, then it's foreign propaganda, not news.
Right. It's important, it's fascinating, and we're seeing some of the lines, the journalistic and legal lines, changing under pressure here. Obviously, the FBI interested. I appreciate you taking some time to tell us about your experience and your discussions with them. Andrew Feinberg.
Thank you.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.